Deconverted Man here. So, the question at hand is, does God exist? And first, I must ask the question, what God? Which one? There's tens and thousands of different gods to choose from. So which one am I answering this question about? That's the first and foremost problem. Now, in my debates and conversations I've had over time on this channel and others, primarily the Christian Judeo God has been the one that I have gone up against in terms of debates. I'm familiar with this God. In America, most people are Christians. Many Christians exist in this country. Worldwide, it's about 33% that is Christian. Last we knew, it might be a bit smaller, maybe a bit larger now. Hard to say. Although the nuns are growing. Atheism often is presented as if it is a worldview by apologists and theists. I suspect that this is done because it is easier to knock down a straw man than it is to deal with the fact that atheists simply don't believe in God. Whatever God is, we don't buy it. We don't believe in it. We're not accepting your bullshit story. That simple. We don't believe it. This thing exists. We say prove it. Then you say, well, of course you can't have proof, you silly person, you, because God's not provable. How do you know that? You don't. Ultimately, all arguments about God are circular in nature. I say that with quite a bit of assurance because I've done this for a while and I've listened to the debates, I've listened to the arguments, and I wondered, how is it that they reach the conclusions that they do about God? Well, it's actually quite simple. They started with what God was and worked their way backwards. God is defined by the scriptures that they believe in. Using those scriptures and perhaps some additional theology that they add on top, they get to various conclusions about what God is, what God wants or doesn't want, and how God works, broadly speaking. And then using those ideas, they then create an argument that they think concludes in God. We can see that in the earliest argument, St. Augustine. His different proofs of God, proof only in a logical sense, but of course his proofs don't work because they are not sound, although they are presented as valid. They're structured correctly for the most part, but the premises aren't necessarily sound, and there's many reasons to question them. But he concluded with, and that we call God. Well, no, you call it God. You call the thing that makes the universe God. You assume that God made a universe. Why do you assume that? Well, because your book said it did. Your book said that God made the universe, therefore your God must make the universe in your argument. Otherwise, you're not arguing for your God, you're arguing for a different God. So ultimately, all the apologetic arguments result in my book says a thing about God. And that's how I know that this thing about God is true, because my book said it so. And then here's my argument. So you look at, say, the Kalam. Oh, there's a cause of the universe. And you go, okay, well, that's interesting. All right, and that's the end of that argument. And then tacked on to that argument a second or third or fourth argument that well, God isn't this, it's that. God isn't natural, it's magical. Well, we don't like the word magical. We mean supernatural. Oh, okay. How do you know that? Well, because it says that God is supernatural in your book. That's why you know that God is that, because that's what it said in your book. You don't really know that that's what God is. That's what you're told God is in your holy book that you believe in. But the arguments don't actually lead to that conclusion. Because God, whatever it is or isn't, apparently is not like any other object that we have access to. We humans have access to all sorts of objects around us all the time. And we can empirically verify them, if not with our naked eyes, then with various mechanical instruments, telescopes, microscopes, etc. There is almost always some way to visualize any given phenomenon, but not God. But sometimes we don't have empirical evidence for a few things that we think exist, like maybe black holes, although I think we got a picture of that. But nonetheless, okay, what do we have then? Well, when we don't have empirical evidence, usually we have tests, and we can run repeatable tests on these ideas that we have. Now, the tests sometimes are called theories in science, and the theory makes predictions, and if the predictions turn out to be correct, then it's a sound theory. But if not, then you have to revise the theory, you have to change it, you have to alter it, and maybe you even have to scrap it. There is something that will negate the idea that you propose. But what exactly for the apologist, for the theist, is there that would negate God? That is not a thing that counts for the existence of God. What would be the negation? They don't have one. They can't have one, because then they wouldn't be a theist anymore. Because in their view, God has to exist in order for them to make sense of reality, which kind of goes into the whole precept sort of arguments that sometimes get thrown out, because when you have no brain cells, the easiest argument to do is precept. And precept is just, I assert that God exists and that you can't make sense of reality unless God exists. And hey, look, you can kind of make sense of reality, so I guess God exists. Ha 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 ha. Now, by the way, prove everything that there is to prove about reality, as if that's your burden. And if you can't do it, then I win. By the way, your worldview this, your worldview that, and I'm going to assert a lot of things about you that I can't possibly know, all in an effort to irritate you and derail the conversation rather than actually debate you, because that's not what precept is. Okay. Other arguments for God. Besides what? The cosmological, or the just cosmological in general. Universe has a beginning, therefore God. Why? Well, because it can't be infinite. Why not? Because we said. Okay, so it has to be God. Oh, why? Because we said it, that we just said that. We just said, or the one where you just think about God. Oh, if you think about God, then it exists, because it's the greatest conceptual thing ever, and it's even greater to actually exist, as if greatness of things is a property of the universe that must comply with our demand that it is greater to exist than to not exist. You can't just shape reality to your whim. A dictionary definition doesn't pull something into existence. But that's essentially what they want to happen with that argument. Every single concept of God has come from humans, made by humans, delivered by humans. Not a single one has been demonstrably demonstrated to come from anything other than a human. And that's not the genetic fallacy. although some would accuse me of that, to say, well, we made it up, but we did make it up. And then you can say, well, the other religions, they're all evil gods. Oh, yeah, sure. Of course they are. Or they're evil spirits that God's letting confuse people because reasons. But of course they say that about you. But God is silent and allowing us to be in this confusion. Even though the Judeo-Christian Bible says that God is not the author of confusion, apparently it is. So which is it? Well, it's both. It's whatever you need it to be, whenever you need it to be. Because God is definitely in our brain as an idea. As far as it being anywhere besides our brain, I don't believe it. Because I don't have the things for God that I do for everything else. For everything else, I have either empirical evidence and or a repeatable test. I have one of those, if not both of those, for everything that I can think of. Except for objects of the mind. But there I have logical arguments that are valid and sound. Objects of the mind exist only in our mind, in our brain. And I don't want to use the word mind too much because people hear mind and they think that that's somehow separate from the brain. But as far as I can tell, it's not. The brain is required for a mind to be. Yet God's mind is disembodied. God is brainless, according to many theists. Yeah, God has no brain. You believe in a thing that has no brain, but can think. But it gets worse, because God also can speak. It spoke the universe into existence. How the hell does that work in a non-physical realm? Please explain. But it doesn't matter. They don't need to explain it. First, they can't because it's not in their book. And secondly, even if they had some explanation, it would be pure speculation because, again, it would just be based on their holy book and not based on anything else. We have no actual evidence for this thing. But it doesn't matter because you can just believe in it. Faith allows you, enables you to believe in whatever the hell you want for any reason, whether it's good reason, bad reason, doesn't matter. Our imagination empowers us to be able to do this thing. Our imagination that we can use to plan ahead and think strategically. And picture in my mind's eye where the enemy might be so I can attack them easier. Of course, they're thinking about where I might be, so I have to outthink them. And the same tool of imagination can be used to tell stories to each other. And we love stories. We cry at a movie. It's a flat thing. It's not three-dimensional. I'm watching images on a screen, listening to people talk to each other, but that's filmed. Those are actors. But if I forget that and I lose myself to it and I connect with these people, all of a sudden I find myself crying at a sad thing. And we do that for plays as well, stage plays. So we connect to a story even if and when we know that story is completely made up. Religion just removes the it's made up part. At the end of most films, you'll see an odd warning kind of message that's attached, perhaps so they can avoid lawsuits. This is not based on real events. Well, no kidding. That's at the end of, the Marvel movies. I didn't need to be told that Marvel doesn't really exist in real life, but it's up there. Now, at the end of a stage play, you don't get that kind of warning, but you do get all the actors usually bowing because they're done with the play. And in many stage plays, you get to interact with the actors afterwards and say, hey, good play, and you tell the director, good play, and all that. And shake their hands, and they're real people. Even though a moment ago they were some other character, now they're a real person talking to you. But our imagination allows us to pretend otherwise. But religion just removes the pretend part from the story and says, here's the story, and never follows up with, by the way, we made it up. And allows you, enables you, encourages you to believe in the story without any empirical evidence, any repeatable test, and as far as I've ever encountered, no sound argument. Although many are valid, I have not encountered a sound one yet. Because to be sound, an argument must be valid. And its premises must be true. That first part is a technical matter. The argument has to be in the right format. Premise 1, premise 2, you can have additional premises, but 2, you have to have at least 2, and then a conclusion. You can have additional premises, but 2 is the bare minimum, as far as I can tell. And there might be other non-classical logics that allow for others, but that's classical logic. And in informal logic, it's just dealing with logic, but dealing with the informal exchange of language that we deal with all the time. So normal language, if you will. A more formal logic would be the syllogisms, would be just the abstract. A equals B, B equals C, A equals C. Well, what are you talking about? Well, you're talking about abstract objects. You're not talking about anything real yet. So it works because the formula works, and it's really easy to see if the formula worked. But once you get away from the abstract and you label these things, Bob is a car, cars are made of metal, therefore Bob is a car. Okay, well, is Bob a car? Well, in the argument he is, but in reality, is Bob a car? Well, wait a minute. Is Bob a human, or did we name Bob? We named a car Bob? I guess we did. Then fine. But we have to check in with reality to find out about Bob. So how do we check in with reality? With more arguments? No. Well, what system do we use? The scientific method. What's that rely on? Empirical evidence, repeatable tests. Oh, back to that then. So we can't get away from the need of verification of reality. But of course, you will get those out of desperation who go, well, wait a minute, you can't even trust your senses, so you can't trust anything, so you don't know that reality is real, ergo, the only way to trust reality is real is to believe in God. What? Huh? How did you get to that? From that? What? You can't trust your senses all the time. Therefore, there's a God that makes it that you can trust your senses some of the time. Therefore, you can trust your senses some of the time, and therefore God exists. What? Huh? No. Wouldn't the conclusion be, if you can't trust your senses some of the time, then some of the time you can't trust your senses? And God has no say in that. It has nothing to do with any of that. But the apologist has to defend God. I don't. I'm a skeptic. I can be wrong about God. I can be wrong about any God. And then I find out, oh, well, that's interesting. I learned something new. And that's fine. I can learn about theology, its history, who did what, when, where. I can look at the real theology with eyes unclouded by faith, by beliefs about that the Bible has to be this way, or it has to be read in this way. It doesn't have to be read in any way. I don't know. I'm just going to read it and see what it says. And I ain't going to read it in English either. I'm going to read it in the original language and translate that, if I can. I'll have to get a translation thing, but that's what I'm going to look at. And then I'm going to listen to the people that first wrote it down. The Jews, in the case of the Bible with the Torah, because they know what they wrote. They know about that. But they changed their version too. They changed it from many gods to one God. Why did they do that? I don't know, but they did. Will they admit to that? Have no idea. I'd have to talk to them. And different Jews might say different things about that. Judaism didn't necessarily start as a monotheistic religion, but it became that over time. And perhaps something was lost in translation. Perhaps a great deal was lost in translation. But I, as a skeptic, can accept what the original language says, even if it indicates there's multiple gods. It doesn't matter to me, because I don't believe in those gods, but at least I'm reading about them in the way that they were presented originally. But the theist, who is bound to a certain idea of what God is, has to believe that God and no other God. Cannot see God for what God is, but of course they're not seeing God anyways, they're seeing an idea of God. That idea that they got from their own version of the Bible, their own understandings of the Bible, their own tradition of the Bible. The church told me this is how we do it. We've got a pope. That pope says something. When he sits in that chair, it's absolutely true, and he can't be wrong about it. If a pope contradicts him later on, it's okay. It will all make sense, and don't worry about it. Don't think about it. It's still completely true. So if the next pope says something that contradicts what the last pope said, it's still true. Whee! Fun times. Okay, cool. Why not? And the church can best reveal God's mysteries through all the ceremonies and such that you need to participate in as a Catholic. And they do it best. Go to the Protestants. Well, we got it figured out. We got rid of all that silly stuff that the Catholics have. Yeah, so now we do the Lutheran stuff, because, Martin Luther, he came up with this list of things to get rid of in the Catholic Church, and so we're all Lutherans. Well, no, I don't know about that. Let's focus on baptism. Then you got the Baptists. Oh, no, let's focus on staying really quiet in our shares. And, we're shaking now. We're gonna call ourselves the Quakers. Oh, wait. We want to celebrate and run around and wave our arms and dance. Now we got the Pentecostals. Hey, wait, there's a verse in the Bible that says we can mess with snakes and not get hurt. Now we've got the snake handlers. And on it goes. The idea that God will reveal itself to one tiny part of one nation at a single moment in time is utterly ridiculous. Why would God do that? Really? Waited for thousands upon thousands of years to reveal itself to humanity in the flesh, to give us the ability to see signs and wonders, but only in a limited time format during a time when a whole bunch of other beliefs are rampant, and also, by the way, illiteracy is also rampant, so nobody can write down what's going on. And also, by the way, video cameras haven't been invented yet. Because that makes sense. Don't send Jesus to China where they have writing already figured out. Don't educate your people how to write. Goodness forbid we have any way to actually document any of this stuff, because faith is exalted. Faith is the thing that all religion hangs upon. Mark my word. Faith. Belief without evidence. And sometimes in spite of evidence to the contrary. Believing in something that isn't obviously true, but you want it to be. You need it to be. You desire it to be. And people of faith will sometimes talk about, I struggle with faith. I'm struggling to maintain my faith. And I say, let it go. Let it go. Why struggle? Maybe it's not worth holding on to. You're fighting your brain trying to tell you to let it go because it doesn't make any damn sense. Why fight that fight? Well, then I'll be a skeptic. Oh no, I'll be an atheist, and then that means this and that and the other thing. And how do you know that? Well, because my book said a thing. That's how I know that. Oh, okay. So does God exist in the brain? Sure. But other than that, I don't know. I don't even know what God is. You guys don't know what God is. You guys know what your book says about God, but how do you know that that's God? Why would God write stuff or have stuff? Well, by the way, now, I don't know, maybe there's a theology where God actually wrote the stuff down, but for whatever weird reason, usually religions have it that some person wrote down the stuff on behalf of God. Hell, even Jesus doesn't write anything down. Why not? You're God. You can't pick up a pen and a paper? Write something down. Why not reveal yourself now to all humanity at the same time? In a clear, coherent way that none of us would misunderstand or not believe in. God could do it. It know. It would know. If it can know, why not? But I'm assuming things about God now too. I'm assuming that God can communicate with humans. I'm assuming that God can show itself to humanity. Where do those assumptions of God come from? Well, I have to borrow those assumptions about God from what I'm told about God, who, again, remains utterly silent if it's a thing at all besides the thing that I know that it is, which is an idea that exists in the brain. Ideas exist in our heads. Think about triangle. Just triangle. Okay? In your head, think about triangle. What's triangle? What is it? Well, it's a shape, sure. But in your head, if you try to picture a triangle, now you're not really thinking about triangle, you're thinking about a particular type of triangle. And so there's a concept of triangle, which is universal. Here's what a triangle is, angle, blah, the technical description. And then there's the particular version of triangle. So there's a concept triangle. Is that transcendent? Has that always existed? Does that exist without minds? No. That's silly. We came up with triangle. Yes, triangles exist in nature, but how else did we come up with them but to look at nature? And in fact, pretty much everything that we have that we've ever thought of is based on something else that already exists. We find something new and we go, hey, this is new, and now I'm going to make stuff about this based on that new discovery. Cool. But it's still based on something that is real to some extent, right? So where did we get these ideas that we invent? Because we invent ideas, right? We make a new, tire. Where did we get the wheel from, right? Well, we saw something round. And we saw that it rolled better than other things. So we saw it work, and we refined it over time. And God also is that sort of thing that we invented to tell a story. Maybe it was a really simple story, too. We didn't know what was beyond that hill over there, but what we did know is the few people that had gone that way died. Or, well, we don't know that, but we do know they didn't come back. They went over that hill, they didn't come back. Now, we've been very careful about avoiding that hill to see what's up with it. We're scared of going near that hill because the people that went near it have not come back. And they sent explorers, they explored, and they didn't come back. So we don't know what's going on with that hill. So we invent a story. We tell a story, say, there's a being, animal that will eat you. that's living behind that hill. Now, that's not true, or if it is true, we couldn't hope to know because nobody has seen what's behind the hill and lived to tell the tale or ever came back. But it's a good story because it scares the hell out of the kids and it keeps them away from the hill. And it keeps us safe. So it doesn't hurt us to believe that there's a creature behind the hill. But one day some guy, gal, whatever, goes up the top of the hill, looks over, and then comes back down, and they came back. They came back from the hill. How did they do that? And all of a sudden they realize, I have power. In this moment, I can tell them anything. And they'll believe me because nobody else is going up there. And they'll not only believe and listen to what I say, but they'll follow it. I am in charge now. I have power. And man, is that a drug trip. Have you ever been put in charge of any amount of people at any level? It's kind of a power trip. The first time you're put in charge of something, you're like, woo! How far can I push this? And you find out exactly how far you can push it. Because you got to be careful. If you tell the people something completely insane, they won't believe you. But if you tell them a little lie at start, I saw the creature. You didn't see the creature, by the way. But it doesn't matter. You tell them you saw the creature. And the creature looked into my eyes, and I looked at it, and it bowed to me. There, that's the story. Wow. Why did it bow to you? Because it knew I was in charge. It wanted me to lead you. Yeah, we'll stay away from that hill, especially now, because I'm the only one that can look in its eyes and live. It will kill anyone else that goes near it. Oh, yeah. And by the way, I'm going to get a couple guards here, and they're going to make sure that nobody goes to that hill because we don't want anyone to die. By the way, guards, anyone approaching that hill, kill them. Why? Well, because I don't want anyone to go to the hill, because then they'll know what's behind it. But I don't tell them that. And there you go. Religion has started. And then it evolved through time. The story changed. And it changed to fit our society's needs and desires over time and through different cultures and eras. And it has evolved with us. And that's all it's ever been, is an idea. Something that explains something else or fills a need that we don't know how else to fulfill. And that's all it is this idea that we have refined over time. If it was more, if it is more, then it shows no indication of being that. And so we skeptics have demanded over and over again for the theists to prove it, and they cannot, they will not do it. Why is there no empirical evidence for God? Because my book says that there isn't. Because you're a sinner if you ask for evidence. Because if God gave you evidence, then you wouldn't have to have faith. Oh, God wants me to believe without evidence. Why would God want me to do that? Because it says that in the book. Oh, how do you know your book is true? Well, of course my book is true. What about this book that says your book isn't true? That one's false. Oh, okay. Clever. How do you know any of that? You don't. You don't. But God explains this, that, and the other thing. Why, without God, fill in the blank doomsday scenario is true. And you go, yeah, that's interesting. How do you know that? Because they don't know it. They don't know anything about God. Except for what their holy book told them. Except for what their theology told them. Except for what they've come to believe about God. But they've never had God there to examine. Because all God is an idea. It isn't anything more. Otherwise, we could test it. We could verify it. We could show it. We could demonstrate it repeatedly. I'm told things about God. But yet God, whatever it is, says nothing for itself ever. A giant wave is coming. And it's you can see it. But it's coming. Now, you can run. Now, whether or not you'll escape the wave, who knows, but you're probably going to run. But a few people are going to kneel down and pray that God will stop that wave, save our town, and they're dead. Except for one guy. One dude survives the tsunami. Amazing, a miracle. God protected me. Yeah, but wasn't your prayer to protect the entire city? It doesn't matter. God protected me. Oh, okay. What about the other people? Well, it was their time. So God protected you, but not them. Right, yeah. Okay, why? Because, I don't know, because God likes me, I guess. Nice story, bro. But that's all it is. I hear about people, I got healed. God healed me. I'm like, okay, so if you'd stayed sick, then God doesn't exist? No. Oh, okay. So what would it mean if you hadn't gotten better? Either you'd still be sick or you'd be dead from the thing that was infecting you or whatever. Would that mean there is no God? No. Okay, so how does you getting cured prove God? If you not being cured disproves God, then at least I could accept the idea that being cured proves God. But if you pray or you want God to save you, but it doesn't, then doesn't that mean that God didn't exist for you? And since there are people praying for people that they don't know somewhere in the world, I know I used to be one of them, I would sometimes pray for everybody in the world. And I didn't end my prayer there. I prayed not just for people in the world, but everybody in the past, present, and future would be taken care of by God. That He would figure it out. He would protect them, keep them safe, make them feel loved, etc. Because I worried about the people of the world, and I wanted God to do that. But my prayer was not answered in the way that I asked it. Why? Because the only thing I was talking to when I prayed was me. The only thing I was interacting with when I was thinking in my head to God is me. When you pray, whether it's in your head or out loud, you're talking to you. That's what God is. God is you. But not in the sense that you're God and you can do whatever God, you think God could do. But the idea of God becomes compartmentalized in your brain, and you can talk to it as if it's another entity. And your brain will start to pretend it is another entity. And maybe if you really break your brain hard enough, it will start to talk back. And then you got to be careful. Because goodness knows what it will tell you to do. God is an ultimate control mechanism created by people for people. Whether it was created for benign reasons or not doesn't matter. Whether or not the idea can be used for good, and perhaps it can be, but it can also be used for great evil. But regardless, the idea is just an idea. What if we admitted that worldwide? What if we just said God's an idea? What happens? I don't know. I don't know what happens. I don't know if the world suddenly gets better, or if it starts to get better, or if we totally change how we do things. We wouldn't need churches anymore, I guess, but maybe the way the churches operate would change, and they'd start being honest and stop denying science and stop calling everybody a sinner all the time. Stop trying to make people feel bad or panicked about the world. I don't know. But I do know that God is an idea of the mind. And if it's anything other than that, I have never been presented with empirical evidence, repeatable tests, or a sound argument to convince me otherwise, and I doubt that I ever will be. I hope to be proven wrong, but so far, I keep being right about this. And maybe I'm wrong about a lot of things. And I don't know the answers to all the questions, but I do know what the answer isn't. The answer isn't that God exists as anything other than an object of the mind until somebody can produce the God in question. If it can't do it itself, well, okay, cool. I guess we'll find it one day. But that sort of God is a different sort of God than the one that I'm told about a lot of times, so I don't know. I don't even know if I'll recognize it when we finally find it, if we found it. What if it's a frog? Okay, that's weird. But yeah, that's God. Okay, cool. That's it. All right, problem solved. Can it die? Yeah, it can die. It's a frog, but it's God. Well, how does that make sense? It doesn't have to make sense. That's just how the nature of reality is. Okay, cool. Did it make the universe? No, it's identical to a frog, but it's not a frog, it's actually God. Why? Because that's how it is. What if that's the way it is? I don't know. But my book doesn't say that, so that can't be right. You haven't read The Lobsterist, have you? I almost talked about The Lobsterist, but I didn't bring it up till just now. God could be a lobster. Why not? Or, well, it's not an actual lobster. It just looks like a lobster, but it's a big one. A real big one. And it's always existed forever. At the bottom of the sea somewhere. You won't find it. You'll find other lobsters. You'll find really big lobsters, but you'll never find the original deity lobster. Because it's really good at hiding. Really good at hiding. And since it's immortal, you'll never find its bones. See, it's unprovable. But wait, don't we need to falsify it? Yeah, we do, but there's no way to falsify it. Oh, so it's not a theory. Right, it's not. It's make-believe. It's fiction. And I noticed this one final point about apologetics is a lot of times when they talk about God, they'll say, God isn't in the universe. It has to be outside of the universe. God isn't in time. It has to be outside of time. So it seems to me that God is the opposite of things. God isn't physical, so it has to be non-physical. I've got one that they need to add. Well, reality is real, therefore God isn't real. How about that one? How did we get here? How did all this happen? We love that question. We don't know. And one day, we might figure it out. And it'll be some bizarre formula that scientists will have to simplify for the rest of us. And we'll be like, well, that's interesting. What does any of it mean? And the theist will be like, well, I got a book that explains all that. And it's actually been predicted in my book that it will turn out this way. You got to read it this way, though, by the way. Because of course they would. Of course they'd move the goalposts back. If we completely understood the universe and its origin and how all that worked, and we understand abiogenesis completely and fully, which I think we're that more plausible getting figured that out than the universe probably, I would think. But who knows? And the theist is just going to retreat to some other unknown or just claim that God made that thing anyways, because if they didn't, then they wouldn't be a theist anymore. And then they wouldn't have that belief anymore. And then all the beliefs connected to that belief would fade away, and that scares the hell out of them. Oh, by the way, hell also made up by humans, for humans, in order to scare humans, because no coherent being would offer that threat to coerce you into believing in it. No coherent, logical being would need to bribe you into believing that it exists. It wouldn't care if you believed in it or not, and if it did, then it would give you ample evidence so that you could know. Does God exist? Depends what you mean by God, but by and large, I guess the answer is it exists in your brain, but that's it. And that's where it will remain unless and until the person that's saying that God exists has empirical evidence, repeatable tests, or a valid and sound argument. And until then, I submit, we must be skeptical of the conclusion that God does exist. Thank you. That's it. That's all for me, everybody. I've been Converted Man. Until next time, stay skeptical.